My name is Kuenzli, and the title of my question is what do we do with the current jail? The alternative proposal I would like to suggest consists of 1. Doing away with the proposed enormous coffin-like box. Secondly, keeping the current jail. Thirdly, adding a structure half the width of the proposed box and only 4 stories high behind the courthouse. It would have 70 beds, meeting spaces, 4 new courtrooms, and space for a clerk of court, and so on. Costs would be less than half of those proposed for the justice system, justice center. Fourthly, instead of locking up people in this big box, investigating in jail diversion programs that take place outside of this proposed enormous box. First, the current jail. I read the long list of deficiencies of the current jail, from design to safety. I have to admit that I looked at this list with the same skepticism I read the reasons why Roosevelt School needed to be closed, why Henshaw had to be demolished. I memorized the deficiencies of the current jail and asked for a tour. Captain Dave Wagner, the jail administrator, gave me a private 1.5-hour tour during which he answered most of my questions and cleared up misunderstandings. I truly admired his patience and openness. On the day of my visit, there were 70 people in the Johnson County Jail, and again about 70 male prisoners housed in the Muscatine Jail and 5 women in the Washington County Jail. To my astonishment, I learned that it costs us, the people of Johnson County, less to keep our prisoners in Muscatine than in the Johnson County prison. That means that the $1.3 million spent on housing prisoners outside of Johnson County is saving us money. In addition, Muscatine also provides free transportation of Johnson County prisoners from Iowa City to Muscatine and from Muscatine to Iowa City. The tour of the current Johnson County prison showed me a well-functioning prison. On that day, the cells and the corridors were very quiet and not crowded. The large cell room and the cells for solitary confinement on the first floor were empty. And so was a large cell room for women on the second floor. I looked into other cells via the TV monitor. Most of the prisoners watched television. I myself asked if there was any kind of exercise room. And Captain Wagner pointed out 3 stationary bicycles, but he mentioned that there was very little demand for them. After my visit, I talked with an architect who was part of the architectural firm that designed the current jail. This architect was very proud of the design and thought that it was ahead of its time. Indeed, when you drive by, you might hardly notice that it is a jail. I'm always astonished when the people who have lived in Iowa City for years have no idea where the jail is. The architect also told me that in 1981, when the jail opened, it made use of solar energy, but that the whole solar system was dismantled 6 months later because the people who were in charge of the jail did not want to know how to use it. The cost of the whole jail in 1981 was $2,200,000. The land on which the jail was built was given to the county by the regions. The architects foresaw expansion in the form of a parallel structure and connecting wing. But additional land would have to be obtained from the university, which uses the surrounding area as a huge parking lot. In addition to the architect's plans for expansion, I could think of several other possibilities today. Secondly, the additional structure. But two other issues need to be addressed: the need for additional courtrooms, more space, and safety in the courthouse. In addition to keeping the current jail, I suggest building a structure into the hill behind the courthouse that is less than half the size of the proposed justice box. It would be maximum 4 stories high. The proposed 5-story box detracts from the courthouse, especially when you look at it from the post office. And it takes up the length of a whole block. This much smaller structure that I propose would also be connected to the courthouse and contain 4 new courtrooms, cells for 70 beds, meeting rooms, exercise rooms, and space for the city clerk. The jail kitchen could be moved into this new structure, thus creating an exercise room, additional meeting room, and library in the current jail. This new structure would have a secure entrance on Capitol Street and would be 400 feet from the entrance of the current jail, also located on Capitol Street. It would have geothermal heat and cooling, and its estimated cost would be $20 million. The supervisor's proposed box. 1. The proposed box is simply too big. This box would not only double current space. The supervisor's proposal requests space that is 5 times what we have now. Secondly, although this enormous box would, we are told, quote unquote, only hold 195 beds and 4 new courtrooms, the shell will be built for 243 beds and 8 new courtrooms. In an open forum 2 months ago, Janelle Reddick stated that the county hopes to get $3 million for the current jail, and that this amount could be used to finish the unfinished spaces in the new structure. 4. Develop and enlarge programs that are alternatives to incarceration. Instead of building this enormous box, we should invest in enlarging jail diversion programs that help people with specific problems outside this proposed box, whether related to mental health, drugs, or drinking. We need to think of alternatives to incarcerating non-violent offenders. Curiously, we have heard many people's views about this box. The persons we have not heard from are the ones that we want to lock up in this box. Some people who are currently in jail or were there could give us perhaps a better idea of what might work in terms of effective rehabilitation programs. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I have an alternative also. Yeah, I gather you couldn't hear me in the back when I was speaking without the mic. All right. I've taken a little different position. I am not a member of any group with regard to this. It seems to me that to say yes to anything is no better than saying no to everything. And what I've been trying to do is come up with both substantive proposals and procedural ways of evolving them that could help the voters of Johnson County get to yes, finally vote on whatever it is we decide we need, and go on to the other challenges that we have in this county. And I've not been very successful at that, but I will share with you some of what I've proposed. I was a little naive the last time around on this vote, I have to admit, because I kind of assumed, and I really should have known better after my years of experience, that we could support this and then the proponents would be willing to sit down and come up with something more rational than what they were talking about. Well, I don't know why I thought that. I guess it was just an abundance of goodwill or something, but since then, I've discovered with the second proposal that I was really wrong, because they had a lot of alternative ideas put out there and they chose not to grab on to any of them, and we were left with what Jeff has reminded us is called TINA. So I wrote another column in the Press Citizen on the 12th of this month, and in it I laid out some alternative ways of thinking about it that I was hopeful both substantively in terms of what was being proposed and procedurally would enable us to come to an agreement on this and move on. Sort of the centerpiece of this idea is that we split off what is being called a justice center into what I call a criminal justice center, and split that off both on the ballot and physically from the courthouse. There doesn't seem to be that much divisiveness. I may be wrong, this is Johnson County, but there doesn't seem to be that much divisiveness with regard to the need to do some things in the courthouse. And I think we could come up with agreement about that. And as a consequence, by getting the criminal operations out of there, that would at least to some degree address the security concerns. It would open up more space in the courthouse. If you want to make it Americans with Disabilities Act compliant, you can spend money on that. If you want to make it more secure, because some people think that divorce cases involve more risk of assassinations and other misbehavior in the courthouse than criminal proceedings, you can put in security if you want to pay for that. But let's focus on the courthouse. So that would be the first thing. And then we set up a totally detached, away from the courthouse, criminal justice facility, and I leave a lot of those details open, but we're talking about new courtrooms and chambers for judges, facilities for somebody from the clerk's office, for assistant county attorneys, lawyers, meeting rooms, place for the family to meet, these training programs, whatever it is we want to put in there. There would be absolutely no reason for any criminal proceeding and people associated with it to have to go from this facility to the courthouse. This would be totally standalone and much more efficient for the people working there for that reason. There would be much less controversy over its architectural design, what's been characterized as the big box. I think if it was away from the courthouse, there is precedent for this. When I was growing up in this town as a little boy, everything associated with the county government was in that courthouse. We split off from that the county administration building, which is where all those offices are now, a nice big parking lot. And that seems to work pretty well. And is there ever a need to go from there to the courthouse? Maybe, I don't know. But if so, there's not been a lot of complaint about it. So that's our precedent. But the fact is there is a lot of precedent around this state for counties that have addressed this very issue and come to exactly my conclusion. Something that I never knew when I wrote the column, but I just discovered today. Cedar County, Des Moines County, Dubuque, Jasper, Polk, and goodness knows how many more. Obviously, I didn't have time this afternoon to look at all 99. They have designed almost precisely what I'm talking about. Moving all the criminal stuff out of the courthouse, leaving the courthouse for civil proceedings. They know something. What is it they know we don't know? That is so obvious to them and so abhorrent to those who are proposing this so-called revised Justice Center proposal. Third, I think there are reasons to preserve the integrity of the courthouse. It's a valuable Iowa City asset, like the old Capitol, an attraction in the area that the city and the Convention Bureau and all those people who care about that stuff, they want to develop that part of Iowa City. Now, it may or may not be legal to attach that big box as an extension on this 100-year-old U.S. Register of National Historic Places structure. But why would anybody want to? Why would you want to do that, even if you can do it and not go to jail yourself? Would we put such an extension on the old Capitol? Of course not. Think about that. How abhorrent that would be. It's equally abhorrent when it's attached to the courthouse. If we want to make this downtown area more attractive to tourists and potential residents, and little cafes, and goodness knows what all they have in mind, I haven't checked with Mark Moen. Why on earth, as an effort to promote these goals, would we plop an enormous jail filled with criminals down in the middle of the area? Is that a tourist attraction? I don't think so. And if it is, there's no reason why they can't walk 5 blocks away like we do to get to the administration building. So I don't see that we gain anything in terms of the downtown development. I think we create additional problems for ourselves in the courthouse. We can resolve those problems in the courthouse. We can provide a better criminal justice facility than anything they are talking about as proponents. And as I concluded that column, Iowa City is not like Washington, D.C., where the best that anybody can hope for is the least worst alternative, if indeed you can even get that, as we discovered this last week. Here in Johnson County, we can have it all. We can improve the courthouse's interior while preserving its exterior in setting. We can detach a criminal justice center from the ballot and from the courthouse, create one that is more efficient and pleasant to work in than anything the proponents have even dreamed of so far. There are alternatives. All yours.
You're a tough act to follow.
Oh, no. You are.
Well, a date rape and assaults of all kinds have victims, and so do robberies and burglaries. And perpetrators of crimes that have victims should indeed be jailed, imprisoned, and punished. I'd be the first person to agree to that. However, according to the statistics from Professor Neff, drug charges account for approximately 16% of jail bed usage. And in fiscal 12, there were 4,280 bookings into jail for possession of controlled substances, 1,269 bookings for possession of marijuana second offense, 276 bookings for failure to affix a drug stamp, 246 bookings for possession of marijuana third offense, and 56 bookings for gathering for the use of marijuana. And in all cases, there are more charges than bookings, but for some reason, for some offenses, the ratio of charges to bookings is very large. And this is an indication that the police are overcharging for some reason that's unrelated to the drug arrest. There are no public safety issues whatsoever involved in possession of drug paraphernalia and the failure to affix a drug stamp. The eighth number, the eighth right in the Bill of Rights is, quote, excessive bail shall not be required, nor excessive fines imposed, nor cruel and unusual punishments inflicted. And over the years, the idea of what was cruel and unusual in punishment has changed a good deal. You know, back in the day, it was okay to hang, draw, and quarter people, and tar and feather, and keel haul, you know, under a ship, and all kinds of things that we considered beyond the pale now. And I think my feeling is that the severe laws, at least in Iowa, and the minimum sentencing laws as well, have made the laws and the punishments for simple possession of marijuana a cruel and unusual punishment that is really against our rights as citizens of the United States. We should stop locking people up because they use drugs and can't pay their fines or engaged in prostitution or are guilty of other victimless crimes. It's a waste of space, and it's a waste of police time and court time, and it's just generally not going to help because these behaviors are so pervasive. The 2003 Federal Research Division report noted that it is widely recognized that law enforcement is only able to seize about 10% of the drugs reaching the U.S. market. The most recent State Department and National Drug Intelligence Committee reports provide a combined estimate that in 2006, at least 8,700 metric tons of marijuana was available for sale in the United States. 1 metric ton equals 2,200 pounds, so that would be 19,140,000 pounds nationally, and about 376 pounds right here in Iowa City. Now, if you divide that up into 4-ounce bags, that, of course, makes the number even larger. And this pot is being bought and consumed by people regularly, or they wouldn't be in the business of doing this. It's the law of supply and demand. They probably could sell more of it if they had it. And the reason is that people smoke marijuana for good reasons besides recreation. Saying it's only smoked, quote, to get high, end of quote, is like saying that people drink only to get drunk. It's smoked for relaxation and mood adjustment, much as people have a drink before or with dinner. It enhances appetite and makes music, films, and sex more enjoyable. Who can argue with that? It's smoked as a painkiller. The smoker remains entirely functional but feels less pain, emotionally or physically. And I think that a lot of people who are, suffering from the circumstances of their life, whether it's because they are poor or, ill or whatever, use marijuana because it's the only thing that can give them relief that doesn't make them dysfunctional. It relieves nausea. It's now recognized by the board of the Pharmacy Board of Iowa that it should be rescheduled and not be a Schedule I drug anymore because it has a demonstrable medical use. And in a town like Iowa City that has 2 hospitals and a large number of people coming here with serious diseases, it's not really humane for us to be having this heavy-duty, hardcore attitude about marijuana. It's a substitute for alcohol, and if Kinnick Stadium were full of students smoking marijuana instead of drinking, there would be no fighting or barfing or hangovers. And it's used by those who know that they have a problem with alcohol as a preference to staying away from trouble with alcohol. If marijuana could be smoked without the fear of arrest, would you prefer your children to use marijuana or alcohol? I choose marijuana. It's a clear choice if safety considered. There's a recent article about synthetic marijuana that people are using desperately because it's legal. It's also very dangerous and shouldn't be used by anybody in their right mind. The police regularly get a Byrne grant. It's B-Y-R-N-E, Edward Byrne grant. And this amounts to a lot of money every year. And the key activities of the project that justify this grant include the successful investigation, apprehension, and prosecution of any and all individuals or organizations associated with the manufacture, distribution, or sale of controlled substances and the seizure of any and all accumulated assets. And basically, since they've gotten $358,000 in 3 years and have applied for another $128,336 for the current year, marijuana is a sort of a cash cow crop for law enforcement and a key justification for the drug task force that's carrying out a lot of these warrants and searches. Despite marijuana's relatively innocuous nature and overall safety for the consumer. And the following performance measures are continually tracked and assessed and reported in these grant applications. The number of new investigations initiated, the number of search warrants served, the type and quantities of controlled substances seized, and the number of clandestine labs dismantled, and the number of firearms seized, and so forth. It's not like having a quota, but obviously the more they report, the more likely it is that they will get the grant, which kind of tells you why we have some of the activities going on that we do. Two main ingredients of the situation with marijuana are hypocrisy and fear, because large numbers of people locally use pot or used it at one time, and these include some of the pillars of the community, and at least at one time included members of law enforcement when I was working with law enforcement or with the Department of Corrections back in the 70s. Legalizing pot is a plank in the Johnson County Democratic platform, but this hasn't led to any action to lessen enforcement locally or to loosen state laws, including the infamous minimum sentence one. And as I said, Iowa has some of the severest laws in the nation. Pot's a barrier to good community policing, because how can people, and youth especially, become friends with the police to the point of trust and confiding if they use pot? Paranoia isn't caused by the physical effects of pot, it's caused by the very real fear of arrest. And it's arguable that police could look past pot usage, as they did in the 70s and early 80s here. Young people wouldn't be using more dangerous alternatives and would be more willing to cooperate with authorities to eliminate use of the more dangerous drugs. Thanks.
Thank you, panelists. We're going to move along to questions from the public, and I'd like to remind everyone to limit their speaking to questions only and not to go into commentary. I guess I'll just go around, and whoever wants to speak, I'll bring them the microphone. Does that sound? I have this one. If there's any questions, and if you want to introduce yourselves, or if you have a particular panelist you'd like to address your comment or your question toward.
My name is John Whiston. I'm a clinic professor at the law school, and Mr. Cox and Mr. Johnson know me, but kind of for background for the panel and the audience, I'm a clinic professor, and so my students actually do the representation, and so for the last 13 years I've done, mainly the work I've done is on referral from the public defender, indictable misdemeanors, including a lot of possession of controlled substances, marijuana, operating while intoxicated. We do about 100 cases a year, so I have known and talked to literally hundreds of the consumers of jail services. And I think I have a little bit of an idea of what they would say if they were somehow organized. But my question is I want to say, good for you for thinking about ways of creating an alternative justice system. I agree with kind of the values that are underlying almost everything that you've said, but I have some specific questions that concern me. The first one is that in the brochure that you passed out, it says that the number of drug arrests by the Iowa City Police Department doubled from 332 to 626. What's the time period for that?
2007 to 2011.
No, but per day, per week, per year?
Well, per year. 2007 had the first number, 2011 had the second number.
Well, there's something wrong with that, because Ms. Dieterle's statistics seem to indicate there were about 5,000 arrests, 5,000 bookings at the jail, which is on the order of about 100 a week, and that would be consistent with what I see from the docket sheets. And if they've doubled, that means that we have an additional 50 over the last 5 years or something like that. 50 in a week is 7 in a day. That means most people who are arrested for first offense, PCS marijuana, do the night in jail. Maybe they do another night, maybe not, but generally that's it. The people who are arrested for felony possession with intent, particularly of the harder drugs, cocaine and heroin, a lot of heroin in this town at this point, are going to do some additional time. But what I'm suggesting is that if we have 7 people that we might, by the snapping our fingers, change the drug law, it would reduce the demand, would reduce the need perhaps from 195 to 186, not a huge departure. So my question to all of you is, how likely are the suggestions that you've made? How likely is it going to be that they're going to happen? And what's the timeline for their accomplishment? So for instance, complete reworking of our drug laws. I'd like to get an idea, and the reason I ask this is that there are a lot of people who are sitting in jail, and a lot of people think that the Johnson County, doing jail at the Johnson County Jail is doing really hard time. My students just had a conversation with a person who's incarcerated at the Department of Corrections facility in Mount Pleasant, and his question was, does that mean I have to come back to the Johnson County Jail? Time is really hard in the Johnson County Jail. It's a shithole for people, okay? And I think we need to consider their circumstances in making a decision about how long it's going to take to accomplish these alternatives. So I'd be interested in your timeline and your assessment of the likelihood of success.
Yeah, I'll respond to that in a couple of ways. First, nobody denies that there's an upward slope on drug arrests. Nobody denies this. I mean, there is a between. I mean, you can look at any set of figures you want, and you've got a steep upward curve in drug arrests and drug booking. So you know, we can sit down and talk about the particular figures. You know, in 2012, 1,097 individuals were booked into the jail on drug offenses. John Neff claims that about 20% of the people booked any given night are in there for drug offenses. So a lot of people, this notion that, you know, there's nobody in jail for drug offenses is just not true. I mean, and the number is growing. So we can argue about the stats. Second, how long will it take to change people's minds? I don't know. You know, Colorado and Washington have just legalized possession of marijuana. You know, we're going to have to, you know, all of these alternatives are just part of a bigger puzzle. But we're going to have to, if we're going to just incarcerate more and more people when there's an upward slope of arrest, nothing will get done. Nothing will get done. The other thing is, I'll have to say about the point of Caroline's presentation here is the way in which policing is portrayed by the advocates of a new jail as if the police have no discretion on this. People say, oh, well, the police just go out. Chief Horridine of Orange County State says, go out, walk down the street, drive down the street, see who, if you see any crimes committed, arrest them. You know, that there are priorities here. There's discretion here. And all of the police bodies here have, through the Johnson County Drug Task Force, have put priorities into drug arrest at an increasing rate. That's what's happening. Now, you know, I think if you're concerned about the conditions of the Johnson County Jail, propose a jail that meets our current needs. I will put up a yard sign saying, vote yes, if you propose a jail that holds 150 people. I will do that. In the meantime, we have to send people to Muscatine. It is not a horrendous violation of someone's human rights to send them to Muscatine, which is a perfectly good jail. It is a major inconvenience, and it's particularly an inconvenience for attorneys and the families of the people there, and it would be better to build a new jail here. But that doesn't mean we have to build a larger jail. We need to build a jail that meets our current needs. So that's my response to that, to your question.
I'd like to comment on that too. Number one, if the proposal passes on May 7th, all of this is moot, all right? So whatever time it takes is time it'll take to execute the proposal. Secondly, if it doesn't, what I am proposing, I think, if anything, would take less time than having to remodel the courthouse to attach the big box to the courthouse. It certainly is not going to take any more time than what the current proposal would take. Third, the United States, as you may know, has more people in prison, more jail cells, more prisons than any other country on earth. Apparently, this has not solved our problem in the way other countries have gone about it. So I like to look upon Johnson County as setting an example for other counties around the United States and for the federal government. I'd like to see us on the cutting edge of innovation. I'd like to see us figuring out ways to turn around this ever-increasing number of people in prisons, rather than saying, well, I guess the answer is to build more cells.
You know that's not a characterization of my attitude.
I'm not saying it is your attitude, because basically the number of cells I'm talking about is whatever comes out of the process. Jeff takes a position on that. I haven't taken a position on that. But that's just the process that I want. And whatever that process produces, that'll be the number of cells, whether it's under the current proposal or what I'm talking about. So that's my response to your question about how much time it'll take.
Let me say one more thing to John's question. I did, when I was leafleting back in November, I ran into a guy on the Penn Mall and I handed him a pamphlet that said vote against the new jail. He said, oh man, I'm going to vote for that new jail. He said, every time I get busted, they ship me to Muscatine. and I thought, I think you've got a good reason to vote for it. I mean, there is a real problem here. I mean, my question is whether we should solve this problem, which I think is a very real problem. I think it's disgraceful that we ship people off. And we ought to provide facilities here for the number of people we arrest. But the problem is arresting more. That's the problem. Planning for growth, when growth means growth well above population. So that's just my take.
Hello, my name's Deputy Brent Bushka. I work in the Johnson County Jail. I've been in law enforcement for 15 and a half years, 8.5 years in Coralville as a police officer, and I've been in the Johnson County Sheriff Department for the last 7 years. I've worked in the jail the last 7 years. The point is, the jail was made in 1981. You guys put out lots of facts and figures, and I think you overload everybody with the facts and figures, and I think this gentleman made a very good point that whatever is gonna happen on May 7th, what you guys need to really take in and don't take into consideration is the living conditions that are in the jail. Yes, we can clean it, mop it, and make it look as good as we can, and the maintenance lady can keep fabricating parts for the doors because the company that originally made them went out of business, and she can do all these wonderful things. But the point is, the jail was actually made originally in 1981 for half the size of the people that are in there. So it's really doing an injustice to the inmates who are there, and all your proposals and all your suggestions are not going to change what's currently going on, the number of arrests. And I have to say that all my brother and sister officers do use a lot of discretion when they are arresting people. And the point I'm saying is that that original space is half the space that an inmate would be allowed. By the code, the Iowa Code 50 that runs the, that says what is the space that is allowable for an inmate is twice as big as what it is now. So whatever happens on May 7th, we're still talking years down the road, whether we build this fancy building that's gonna look ugly attached to the courthouse, as that gentleman says. Those inmates that are in there are still gonna have to live and deal with the living space that there is. And, I know you wanted just mostly questions, but you don't get the other side of it too. I'm not voting right or wrong or anything like that, but like the recreation room. They don't go use the recreation room because there's really no recreation in there. That's the real, we're doing the best we can with what we got, and the problem is that it's substandard for the people that are in there, that have to live in there day in and day out. And as this gentleman has said, and I've heard it many times from other inmates, that they don't want to come and do time in the Johnson County Jail, although they always say we have the best food in the Johnson County Jail from all the other jails that they go to. The other thing that I would say to you guys, it is a security factor to load, like tonight, we probably shipped 10 people to Muscatine. So you're cramming all these people in a van, they're all shackled together, and they're in a metal box. And I would say that you don't think it's bad to go from here to Muscatine. I mean, years before, we went to Marshall County for 2 years, and we're packing people in those. So I would invite you that maybe should, and ask Captain Wagner to maybe take a trip in the van to Muscatine and see how you would like it, because it is not fun. And, that's my comments is, whatever happens on May 7th, we still have to deal with the crowding issues and the lack of space for the people that are there for whatever the reason that they're there. Thank you for your time.
Did you have a question?
Basically, I just needed to say that.
Again, we'd like to limit speaking to questions. There's been quite a few public forums held by the county officials and a lot of information given by county officials. So this is an opportunity to learn what the opposition, what our opposition is. So if you have questions for the panel, that would be great. And I believe this lady was next. I know there's a lot of hands, but I saw her hand first.
My name is Dorothy Whiston, and I'm a member of the Johnson County Criminal Justice Coordinating Committee, and so obviously a supporter of this jail, although I will match credentials with anybody on my work for reform of the justice system and working with prisoners in and out of jail. One of the things I've been involved in addition to this over the last few years, is that the Consultation of Religious Communities, which I'm a member, started a task force in 2010 on policing poverty and diversity. Because of our concerns about the relationship between the Iowa City Police particularly, but other police forces in Johnson County, and minority communities, particularly poor communities in our county. And after a lot of work and a lot of meetings with the police chief and the mayor and the city manager and city council people, a committee was established, the Ad Hoc Committee on Diversity and Minority, or on diversity, and they were charged to deal specifically with policing issues. And I would like to know how, A, whether any of you volunteered to serve on that committee, and B, what you think of their proposals.
Well, I did read their report. I think it's a good start. What we have here is a serious racial tension problem. It's just been ignored by most of the public, the vast majority. And I would also say the county. The Jail Space and Services Task Force 10 years ago talked about the disproportionate minority incarceration problem. And John Robertson, who unfortunately passed away, if you go to that report and look in the appendix, you'll see his recommendation for a study that you finally have gotten around to undertaking, or will undertake. I honestly, I can't remember any of the details of their report, but that's a long road to hoe, because the attitudes are mostly that what racial tension problem, and.
I just find it incredible, though, that there have been a lot of citizens in Iowa City working on this issue week in and week out for 3 years, and that none of you have been a part of that, who are now claiming racial disparity as an issue to vote against the jail. And we've been working hard and continually, and will continue to, and there are several members on the Criminal Justice Coordinating Committee who see the need for the new jail, who have been working on precisely these issues. And I just find it incredible that this is the time you're going to say that suddenly we have to do something about this, when others have been working on it all along and accomplishing something, I believe.
Say something about that. I mean, we one of the things that have been said about those of us who oppose the jail is that where have you been? I mean, I'm the editor of the Prairie Progressive. I published an article last summer saying bringing the new Jim Crow to Iowa City. Right? That I don't know how many of you know Michelle Alexander's book on the new Jim Crow. I mean, her basic point is that in America, African Americans are 12% of the population and 45% of those incarcerated. And this is not a national problem, it's a local problem. And we brought this up all fall. And the proposal that came out for the new jail that was sort of rolled out last spring was entirely colorblind. There was nothing in the proposal for the new jail addressed any of the racial issues that we face. And there was a report that came out last spring from the Coalition for Racial Justice complaining about racial disparity all across Iowa, and it said local figures are unavailable. Which is entirely untrue. Dave Wagner's been doing head counts of how many black people are in jail for several years at the request of members of the Board of Supervisors. So this information about racial disparities has been out there. It's just that we have, and I have to say, one of the differences, I mean, Iowa's very different from Texas, where I grew up. I mean, nobody was colorblind down there. Everybody knew that political arguments were about race. What we have in Iowa, because we're not used to dealing with racial issues, is a whole series of colorblind arguments. And colorblind is a word in Michelle Alexander's book. The whole debate about I really reluctant to bring this up, but we have John Dung. Anybody remember John Dung? Completely forgotten, homeless black person, shot dead after getting into a fight with a white person, incredibly intoxicated. The whole report on that from the State Attorney General's office was, I think, perfectly good in terms of the legality of this, but there was no mention of the fact that he was black and he was in a fight with a white person and he was shot by a white deputy. The curfew, remember the curfew? Iowa was one of the only cities in Iowa that didn't have a curfew because we're liberals here until we get black people in town. And then we have this debate on the city council. Absolutely no mention of race, unspecified problems, police, we've got to control people, we have a colorblind debate. The city bus system, I don't know, I mean, I grew up, I'm sorry to use these personal references, but I grew up in a town where black people faced signs telling them where to stand and sit. right? I've still got my father's colored waiting room sign from his doctor's office. I mean, and all of a sudden I walk over to the old Capitol Mall, and there's a big